Well, we're joined now by the Liberal Democrat Deputy Leader Jo Swinson and the Conservative MP and Brexiteer Bernard Jenkin. Welcome to both of you. So as Elizabeth said, we've just got to pick an option, then convince Parliament and then convince the EU. Do you have a preferred option?
I'm not particularly impressed by this new customs partnership at all. I don't think it resolves anything, and indeed staying in the customs union doesn't necessarily mean you get rid of border checks, because all these the EU is insisting if we don't want border checks, then we've got to align our regulation with the EU. It's a very extreme position. All over the world, countries are pursuing what is called the max fac solution. All over the world, the countries are developing a frictionless customs frontier, and that's what we should be working towards in Northern Ireland.
So you don't believe the customs partnership idea could work?
No. I mean, it doesn't pass any of the key tests that the Prime Minister has already sort of outlined in her statements. It doesn't give us full regulatory autonomy, so we wouldn't be able to do free trade deals with other countries. Even if we did a free trade deal with another country, it would be very unattractive, because we would be asking them to eliminate their tariffs, but we would still be charging the EU tariff when the goods came into this country, and we would still be substantial net contributors to the European Union budget, which, as the Prime Minister has said, should end. We would still be the tax collector for the European Union, and that's not acceptable.
So, Jo Swinson, does the first idea that Steve Baker was discussing there, a customs partnership, which sounds closer to staying in the customs union, which would be your preferred option, but the Prime Minister has absolutely ruled it out. Do you prefer it because it keeps us closer to the EU?
I mean, I think the government is in a mess on this. They are sort of, it seems, belatedly starting to recognise the ludicrousness of these red lines, which never needed to be set out in the way that the Prime Minister put them there, the problems that they are creating for the border in Northern Ireland particularly, but also for the many businesses in the UK. You know, most of our export trade, is with the EU. Nearly half of all of it is with the EU, far dwarfing other countries and blocs around the world, and that is what is at risk. And of course, the more that you have barriers, the more that you have regulatory differences, the more risk there will be to that vitally important trade for the British economy.
But what answer do you have to that, other than staying in the customs union, which the Prime Minister has ruled out, and the government has said it's what you have to leave the customs union to respect the result of the referendum?
Well, I would say the government's wrong on that, and I think actually if you look at Parliament, there's going to be an interesting vote on this within a few weeks in the House of Commons. I suspect actually in Parliament, in the House of Commons, there may actually be a majority for staying in the customs union. So just because the government has said it, it doesn't make it right, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be trying to get them to change their minds, because staying in the customs union is absolutely a better option. We should be staying in the customs union and the single market. I think we should be staying in the European Union. But at least staying in the customs union and the single market minimises the damage from Brexit, although even the government's own assessment says that the economy will take a hit even if that softer option is pursued.
At least you're honest about the fact that you would much rather stay in the EU, and that's why you want to stay in the customs union. But that is just trying to thwart Brexit, isn't it? Because you're against it.
Well, I want to do what's best for the country. I was elected by people in Eastern Bartonshire, incidentally, who also voted very strongly to stay in the European Union, as did people across Scotland. 62% across Scotland voted for that outcome. And so I'm trying to make that happen, because I also recognise that for our influence in the world, for our economic health, for all of the values and the benefits the European Union has brought us, it makes more sense. And what we are now seeing as this government negotiates a catastrophic Brexit. I mean, it's not even doing the negotiations competently. The Cabinet can't even agree on what it wants, and we're nearly 2 years on from that initial vote. So, I think as people look at the shenanigans of this government, then more and more people will say, well, hang on, we want to be able to have a say when this deal is done.
Bernard Jenkin, your problem is that the arithmetic in the House of Commons might agree with Jo Swinson's point on this and not you, and vote to stay in the customs union.
Well, they might, but that would be a pretty unwise thing to do. That would be pitting Parliament against the choice made by the British people. And these red lines didn't come from nowhere. These red lines came out of the referendum result, which was about taking back control.
How did they come out of the referendum result?
Exactly. Taking back control over our money, our borders, our laws, and the right to make free trade deals with other countries. If we do any of these solutions that are proposed by the Liberal Democrats, we might as well stay in the European Union, because we will have to finish up obeying the rules of the European Court of Justice. Now, we can have the whole referendum debate again. I don't think the British people want that. They want I think the British people want to leave the European Union. And you know what? Most countries aren't in the European Union. Most countries aren't in any kind of customs arrangement with the EU or with any other country, and they export to lots of other countries very efficiently. This is not an economic argument, it's a political argument. It's not about whether... Everybody agrees that we can prosper outside the European Union. This is a political argument that they have lost, and they will not admit that they have lost.
On trade, the European Union has more trade deals with more countries than the US or China. It is a very successful negotiating bloc for promoting trade and therefore helping economies. But we shouldn't, I agree, we shouldn't have the same, I agree, we shouldn't have the same debate again. What we should have is a debate where we actually look at what is on offer. Now, the government is doing its negotiations, which is not the same as what was talked about last time we had this. We had the debate in 2016, because we now have a lot more information and more detail.
This is trying to reverse Brexit. Well, this is trying to stop Brexit, and Joe's very honest about that, and I would perfectly respect your view, Joe.
But it should be the people that have their say on the deal.
No, you want a second referendum?
No, I want a vote on the deal. I want that not to be just signed off by Parliament.
It is the Liberal policy to have a second referendum, and I think the fact is people want...
But Aaron Jenkin, let me ask you, the Brexit subcommittee of the Cabinet will meet this week, and they're going to decide between the options that Steve Baker was explaining to us there. There is some speculation that they'll go for the customs partnership idea that you've already dismissed. What will happen within the Tory party if that's the way the Cabinet...
Well, I knew you'd ask me that question, but I don't think they're going to go for this. I think the Prime Minister will realise that she can't deliver what the British people... She feels very, very strongly that she must keep faith with the decision of the British people.
And I think is that because of the threat coming from the European Reform Group and MPs like you who are whispering behind the scenes that they might trigger a leadership contest if she goes for a decision you don't like?
The people who have been threatening the Prime Minister are the Remainers in the Conservative Party. They're the people that voted against the government and are threatening to bring the government down. But actually, I think they will be defeated in a vote. And don't forget the Ulster Unionists. They also want to keep faith with the British people, and we mustn't lose their support. That would be very bad for the government. In the end, the Prime Minister wants to keep faith with the British people, which means being like most other countries, running our own regulations, running our own laws, and none of these proposals that the Liberal Democrats are proposing would put us back in control of our own laws, and that's what really matters.
You say it's the Remainers in the Conservative Party who are threatening the Prime Minister. Amber Rudd was at the lobby journalist lunch this week, and she didn't say in absolute terms we'll be leaving the customs union. She said there were still discussions to be had about this in Cabinet. Is she right about that? And are you worried that these discussions are still open in Cabinet?
She made it absolutely clear in a subsequent statement that we're leaving the customs union. I mean, the only argument I might have with her...
It's quite a state of affairs when she has to tweet several hours later what she meant when she was discussing something that the Prime Minister has been so clear on, that we'll be leaving the customs union. Well,
she made her view completely clear, just as Steve Baker, just on your programme, was probably explaining the government line, though he probably agrees with me in private that we shouldn't do this new customs partnership. Collective responsibility is very important in government, and that's why Amber Rudd put out a subsequent tweet. And of course, it's not the only thing Amber Rudd's had to tweet about and correct the record on this week. As this debate continues to go on as to whether or not she knew about the removal targets for illegal immigrants and who'd seen what memo and whether targets have been set within the department. Are you absolutely convinced that she's up to the job? Yes, absolutely. I mean, she's a first-rate Home Secretary. I mean, we know that since the days of the last Labour government, the Home Office has had a huge number of challenges, and because the borders were thrown open under the last Labour government and there was a huge increase in immigration, and we've got a huge number of people in this country illegally on expired visas. This is a very big problem. I think in the end the government's going to have to throw much more resource at this, as Andrew Green from Migration Watch says, for example, in order to deal with this problem. And I think the pressure on officials to try and achieve government policy has been very intense. Right. They may have been setting themselves targets. That's obviously, it's not right that targets we'll have to leave it there. Should be more important than judgment and compassion in these cases, and that's what we've learned. Joe Swinson, thank you very much for that.